My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We've been examining Paul's incredibly important statement, 1 Corinthians 15:56, where he said that the resurrection would be when sin, the sting of death, would be overcome. When you deal with sin, you've dealt with death. And I'm showing that Romans 5 through 8 are directly parallel with Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I have to tell you, Romans chapter 8 verse 2 is one of the most powerful, one of the most incredible, one of the most thrilling verses that we can have in all of this study. And it's so tremendously challenging. It presents to us very subtly, but very powerfully, an already but a not yet, which helps us to define the nature of the death of Adam, that is, the nature of the death to be overcome by the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15. For as in Adam all men die, even so in Christ shall all men be made alive. 1 Corinthians 15:22. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says, "For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set us free from the law of sin and death." Now, I got to tell you what, folks. I was raised in an environment, in a fellowship, that avoided that verse like the plague. Or it would be said something like this: well, now, Paul said that, but let the man who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Because heaven forbid that we could ever believe that in Christ we have salvation. Objectively, truly have salvation. Now, here's what I want you to see. At times we are told, well, salvation is universal. God's going to save everyone, no matter what they do, period. That's not what Paul says. Paul says the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. You know, that term, in Christ, is one of Paul's very, very favorite terms. And what that means for Paul is that the realm in which there is life, the realm, the sphere in which there is no condemnation, Romans 8 verse 1. The realm in which the law of the Spirit of life operates and is given is in Christ. And that means it is not true outside of Christ. If we are not in Christ, then the law of sin and death obviously still functions. You see, it's so absolutely critical to understand that the biblical narrative, the biblical story of eschatology, is the story of God establishing sanctuary, i.e. temple, the place where men and women can find sanctuary from the outside, find deliverance from the outside. And so when Paul says the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, it is simply impossible to overlook the incredible significance of this and to avoid the pitfalls that some fall into when they say, oh, you know, grace just abounds. Grace is so overwhelming. Well, no one taught grace more than Paul. And yet Paul absolutely condemned the abuse of grace. No one taught grace, no one taught salvation more vehemently or more joyously than Paul did. Yet he also restricted the locus of that salvation and of that grace as being in Christ Jesus. It is paramount in importance that we understand Paul's theology of grace, of salvation, of life, and forgiveness, and resurrection. It is in Christ Jesus. That agrees perfectly with 1 Corinthians 15:22. As in Adam all men die, even so in Christ shall all men be made alive. Are all men in Christ? No. We must enter Christ by faith, just like Paul taught over and over and over again. I haven't discussed Paul's concept here of flesh and spirit and continuing that thought of the resurrection. I haven't continued it specifically, but I have implicitly. Because life, resurrection life, is in Christ Jesus. Just as Paul said, as in Adam all men die, even so in Christ shall all men be made alive. He would say, and he does say, the law of the Spirit of life in Christ has made us free from the law of sin and death. Now, what does it mean to be set free from the law of sin and death? Well, we'll talk about that in our next video. In the meantime, I hope you get a copy of my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Future or Fulfilled. Go to my website, DonKPreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. Okay, you do not want to miss our discussion where Paul says, the law of the Spirit of life in Christ has set us free from the law of sin and death. We'll see you on the flip side.